Well, good afternoon, friends. It's good to see you today. It is our last Lunch and Learn of the 2024. I think over the year, we have, had 48 maybe Lunch and Learns. It's been almost every week with a couple of breaks here for holidays or Easter. But thank you for being here. And it's so fun that at the last one, we are continuing to grow here. And part of that's because of the topic today. We've got an amazing topic. If you're here today and ADHD is a part of your reality in life, either because that's something that you live with or somebody that you love or work with lives with, I really do believe today is going to be a blessing to you. Our speaker is Todd Mulliken. Todd is no stranger to Wooddale. He has probably spoken at more Lunch and Learns than any other speaker. And that's on purpose. We love what Todd brings, and I oftentimes say that when Todd is here, it feels like a little bit like group therapy in these sessions. I know many of you are here for the first time for a Lunch and Learn, and you're here because of the topic, I would imagine. And so for those of you who are new, just so you know, these are things that we do most Thursdays, and this is our last because of Christmas coming up for this year. But January 9th, we will kick off our next section of Lunch and Learns, and from January through the end of May, there will only be 1 week that we take off from Lunch and Learns. That'll be Easter week. Otherwise, every single Thursday, we have a phenomenal speaker that'll be here. It'll start with the executive director of Source MN, which is a ministry that works with those who are unhoused in the city of Minneapolis. And he's going to be talking about just kind of understanding how do you serve the urban poor in really a holistic way. On January 16th, we have a great speaker. Carl Nelson is the president of Transform Minnesota, which is an organization that works with churches and nonprofits around the Twin Cities here. And he has the chance every year to take pastors and nonprofit leaders of different ethnicities down to the civil rights spots of the South and allow people to experience that together and to learn from each other. And he's been doing this for about 10 years. And so he's just going to talk about how do you build bridges toward racial reconciliation. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day that week, and just thought it'd be really appropriate to have him in. And then on January 23rd, we're blessed to have Moses Ihambe with us. Moses is the assistant coach of player development for the Minnesota Timberwolves, a little basketball team here in town. And Moses is, he's a phenomenal communicator. His role means that he gets to work with the guys that are normally at the end of the bench, so Luka Garza and the rookies, he's kind of spending a lot of time with them. Or if Anthony Edwards' shot is off a little bit, he's working with Anthony to correct that. And so if you have complaints about how they played on January 22nd in Dallas that night, you can let him know on the 23rd. So he'll be flying back from Dallas the night before to be with us on the 23rd. Moses is much more than just a basketball coach, though. He and his wife, Sarah, are wonderful parents. They have 7 children, and their story is an amazing story. One of their children is with Jesus today, passed away, and so he understands pain and trauma as a parent. He understands sacrifice. He's lived in over 30 cities because his basketball journey as a professional basketball player before coaching really has brought him all over the world to play basketball. I think you'll really enjoy learning from him about how do you bring out the best in the people around you. And then on January 30th, and this is a change from what you saw last week, so Moses' schedule got a little bit mixed up with the NBA because of this tournament they have where they add games. So Lisa Holt has agreed to switch her week. So on January 30th, Lisa will be here, and she'll be talking about when grief has no relief, long-term strategies for those who have been trapped by loss. And her story is one of a daughter, a teenage daughter who lost her father, and a mother who lost her teenager. And you can just imagine the grief that she's been through in her life. And that would just destroy so many people. And I think what she'll tell you is for a time, she felt pretty destroyed. And there are days where you still feel destroyed. And yet God has done some amazing things in her life, and she has used the hardest tragedies in her life to bless others. And I think you're going to be blessed. The whole schedule for Lunch and Learns will be available next week on the familyresource.info website, so you'll be able to see what's happening the rest of the year. We do have all of those booked, and I won't give away all the surprises today because you didn't come to hear announcements. You came to hear our speaker. So would you welcome up Todd Mulliken? Let's give him a big hand.
Yeah, of course. Welcome, everybody. How we doing? Good. So I've been counseling since the mid-'80s, so I'm old enough to remember when ADHD kind of got some legs to it, and we were all going to seminars, and it came out, and we go, oh my gosh, this is so great, everybody has it, like if you're a boy or 7, you're kind of flying around, you have ADHD, yay, and so I think initially when it came out, we really overshot it. Does that make sense? And that happens in my field. I think with diagnoses, when new things come out, we are just aware of it, we're paying attention to it. But I think, the evolution of our understanding of ADHD, I think, has come a long way. So my goal is just to try to speak to you about some of the newer things we're learning, some observations I've noticed, and then get some questions from y'all, and hopefully we can all leave learning from each other a little bit about this really important condition so we know what it is. Let's first talk about what it is, should we? So we've re-diagnosed ADHD now. So there's 3 types of ADHD, and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And right now, there's about an 8 to 9% lifetime prevalence for children to have it, which means in the world, about 8 to 9% of children will be vulnerable to that condition at some point in their life. And it's about 4 to 5% for adults. And that's gone up a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, and I think it'll continue to go up for a couple of reasons I'll bring up in a second. But we have 3 ways of diagnosing it. One way of diagnosing is called ADHD inattentive type. And these are folks that battle distractibility, inattention, hard to land the plane when they're talking because their mind is going lots of places. Really hard to actively listen and encode the message from somebody they love and care about. And with memory, remember, if we don't encode the message, if we don't deeply process what you're telling me right now, it's not going to be stored, and I'm not going to be able to retrieve it. Now, that keeps me in business as a couples counselor, okay? But it's really challenging, right? So folks that have that inattentive type can really be well-intended, but their mind is going to different places. It makes reading comprehension awful and hard for a 16 to 18-year-old, especially as you become a sophomore, junior, senior in high school. Everything gets harder, more volume, stuff I'm not interested in. It's really challenging. I feel like I'm stupid. I feel like I don't belong. The other type is called impulsive hyperactive type. And these are folks that are kind of challenged by kind of blurting, kind of fire-ready aim, the shiny object, and I want what I want when I want it. And they can be, as kids, kind of fidgety and busy and going actively. And so then the third kind is a combination of both. Make sense? So we've redesigned it, so now we don't have ADD anymore. We have ADHD with 3 different expressions. The typical evolution of ADHD typically is it starts with the impulsive hyperactive symptoms we see in kiddos. It evolves into more of the inattentive, distractible stuff we see. And then sometimes there'll be a combination of things. Sometimes the impulsive hyperactive stuff gets quieter, especially if we treat it earlier. And I know there gets to be a lot of pushback from folks about, hey, we're treating kids too young. Sometimes medicine does make sense, and so sometimes people get really concerned and frustrated about that, and I hear all of that, and each case is different. But research is showing over and over again, when it's treated early, as the brain is forming, we're giving the brain a chance to kind of regulate itself, because ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, which means there are brain structural issues, there are genetic differences. In fact, just a fun fact, I don't know if this makes sense to you, like the most heritable condition you and I have is height. Does that make sense? It's the most genetic thing, meaning like if my folks, are 5'10" and 5'11", I'm kind of that, right? And you can probably know that about height. Does that make sense? It's the most heritable condition in the world. ADHD and autism are second and third, respectively. So they're very genetic conditions, and so that helps us understand things. It helps us understand. Remember, this is not meant to be a label. It's meant to have understanding. If I have a genetically difficult right knee and it's chronic, it's a bad condition, it helps me to know that's what I have. And I get to take care of it. I get to have PT for it. Same way with this kind of condition. So again, about 8 to 9% of kiddos, 4 to 5% of adults, 3 ways we diagnose it. So I would say recently I've seen 2 different waves of types of ADHD coming into my office. And my primary work is with couples. I see individuals with different kinds of issues, and ADHD is one of those areas. I would say, it's interesting, more recently I would say this, like the most typical situation for ADHD for me is having a 40-year-old mom in who has a 10-year-old that's been diagnosed with ADHD, and she learns that it's genetic, and she's been treated for anxiety most of her life. And here's what can happen. So what's the truth about anxiety? Anxiety is a condition where if I have, and I have plenty of that myself, we have a pervasive vulnerability to excessive worry no matter what. Makes sense? We're always worrying, and we're always in that what-if house. We have restlessness, we have feeling keyed up and on edge, and we have irritability. Those are the primary conditions of anxiety. If we have ADHD and we go into a classroom when we're 17 and we feel very overwhelmed, we can't track, we can't read that great, it's hard, we can hyper-focus on stuff we love, we're all in, but ADHD now is known as PDF. The P stands for procrastination, the D stands for distractibility, the F stands for forgetfulness. So people that battle this condition, those 3 things are loud. Procrastinate, wait. I don't want to do something that's really hard. I start, I can't finish. I start, I can't finish. So I go into that school, I feel overwhelmed. I feel like it's too much. And I get anxiety there. Does that make sense? I get anxiety there. I am a mom raising 3 kiddos. I'm a stay-at-home person. And all of a sudden, I have all these tasks that have to be done. And I'm overwhelmed, and I'm anxious. So I've been diagnosed with anxiety. I'm on a serotonin drug to help take me off the floor when I'm depressed, take me off the ceiling when I'm anxious. And the body's kind of going, meh, kind of helping. The truth is, in some situations, they have untreated ADHD that's causing them to be anxious in certain situations. The truth is they have ADHD and it causes them to have depression, which involves like low energy, lack of interest in activities, feeling depressed more often than not each day, feelings of excessive guilt. The inner critic comes in, has a party. I always tell people, tell the inner critic to sit down, and there's a lot of excessive guilt with that. So sometimes the truth is with depression for people, sometimes it is the untreated ADHD that's making them depressed, because other things that come with ADHD are typical financial mismanagement. Financial management is really, really challenging. There's the start, there's the shiny object, there's the lack of follow-through. If you know somebody that battles ADHD, if you battle it yourself, you may notice that they have a hard time landing the plane when they're talking. And it doesn't mean they're just trying to bring the conversation back to themselves. It's like, ooh, here we go. And we're going to different places and have a hard time landing the plane. It's not like, hey, I can't wait to not land the plane. I want you to hear about me. I'm a big deal. It's not usually that. It's usually their brain is kind of sorting things out in a way that's challenging for them. A couple other places I think it gets tricky with these observations about making sure we're getting to the root diagnosis would be like with bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder is only about 4% lifetime prevalence. These are folks that can have, and it's very genetic as well, vulnerability to mania under stress, which is grandiosity and recklessness. So sometimes that impulsivity of mania looks ADHD-like. Does that make sense? It looks like that. It's kind of like that. But typically with bipolar, it's very episodic Typically with ADHD, it's very pervasive. That makes sense? It's not just a once-in-a-while thing. There's a lot of ongoing battles with the ADHD mind. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, one observation we have the last 10, 15 years is that we have misdiagnosed some folks, which doesn't mean they don't have anxiety, doesn't mean they don't have depression, doesn't mean they might have some bipolar spectrum stuff, but what's mostly going on in some cases is the untreated ADHD, and we've just missed it. So that's why we really want to know what we're talking about. We really want to get the most accurate diagnostic evaluation. So we usually want to see somebody, like I have somebody that's in my same office area who does a workup for ADHD, so I can know if this person actually has that condition, what are their diagnostic comorbidities they might have. So I think it's good, if we're wondering about that condition, to try to get an evaluation to really know if we really have it or not. So one wave that we've seen is missing it in adults, and they've been diagnosed with something else. The other will be is that we've missed it as they were a kid, and now we're wondering about it when they're an adolescent or young adult. Make sense? So they're 15 to 18. Schooling, like I mentioned, is really hard. It's challenging. It's an uphill climb. They feel inadequate. They feel overwhelmed. They will procrastinate. Much is accomplished through last-minute effort versus much is accomplished through regular, steady effort. They will wait, because it's really hard, overwhelming. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel inadequate. Everybody else is getting this done, and I really hope the teacher doesn't call on me because I can't even track with what they're saying because I'm feeling anxious about the material. I just don't want to be called on. So we really want to walk alongside those adolescents that really battle that condition. I would offer as one just side note here, if we have an adolescent that's battling that condition or a young adult living with us that's in school, the last thing we want to do, in my opinion, is take away all their activities that bring them life and just have them sit down and study for 5 hours. The best way really that we know with ADHD is what we call chunking, start and finish, quick bursts of 35 minutes of math, and then we go do something else, little starts and finishes. Does that make sense? So the brain is learning how to land that plane. They learn how to start something, they learn how to finish something, because a neurodevelopmental condition makes that very challenging. The other thing I want to say out loud that we've learned the last 5 to 10 years, and I just went to a workshop in Boston a couple weeks ago about this, is we really have missed it in females. Okay, we've missed it. It tends to be like overdiagnosed with boys and men and underdiagnosed with females. And I think we have a lot of reasons why we think that. I would offer, I think sometimes the women I've worked with have wanted to make sure they don't, that must not be it. That's not it, because that's kind of a man's thing or a boy's thing. And so I think all that stereotype has been around so long. So I think I work with a lot of women that have kind of repressed that or denied that versus just embracing that. And that really helps them with that impulsivity that is just fire-ready aim, because untreated ADHD into adulthood, the main problem is anger. The main problem is irritability, because there's been so much of this, I can't finish, I've lost that job, the finances, I thought I had a handle on it, and boom. And then when you get to be my age and you have a little bit of ADHD, you for sure think you have dementia, but no, I've lost my keys when I was 22. Right, so it's not just happening when I'm 64. It's a long-term condition, and it's neurodevelopmental. So I think that's the other wave we've seen, is trying to work with adolescents, young adults who've been missed in childhood, having that condition, and trying to work with them, and trying to help the parents remain really, 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 really patient, because otherwise it gets really behavioral and kind of like, why aren't you doing this? And what's wrong with you? And why aren't you studying enough? And it gets really shamey because the parent is overwhelmed, right? Now, usually the good news about that parent or that couple is they can look at each other, well, it's kind of genetic, what do you think? And hey, and that's the best part I've seen really, is when the parent is working on his or her own issues And they start to manage their own issues better, and that really helps them kind of see. I always say, see it, don't wear it. So they see their adolescent and they see the struggle. They see it versus take it on. They have an increased level of compassion and understanding for that condition. So sometimes that can help to reframe it. The other thing I want to talk about real quick that I think is important is something called sensory sensitivities. So we're learning a lot about with ADHD as well as autistic spectrum, and there's a lot of comorbidity with ADHD and autistic spectrum. Like the latest research on autism is that 1 in 36 people have it. Used to be 1 in 200, used to be 1 in 54, now we're 1 in 36. I think it'll kind of land there because that makes sense to me, about 3% of the population, because autism beautifully is on this wide spectrum. And here's some sensory sensitivities that both have. Both have auditory sensitivities, so like noise just can really be challenging. And they have their sensations. Remember, sensations are, we all have sensory receptors within us. And so you and I have a sensation. We see a nice sunset, like, oh, isn't that pretty? Or we touch a hot stove. Somebody goes, that's really hot. Some people go, oh, it's not that hot. We all have different sensations and different perceptions of that sensation. So people with ADHD and autistic spectrum really have heightened sensory sensitivities. And it doesn't mean they're doing something to the family or to the parent. Their body is experiencing that. And that's what is true. That's why we see the last 10 years much more sensory therapy than we see like behavioral, don't do that, don't do this. In fact, with autism, instead of calling it like, they have deficits in social interaction and social communication, they have differences. You know, you have a deficit. No, there's differences. Another kind is tactile or tactical, so like just different touching kind of things. It's different things that we touch can impact us, and sensitive to touch, sensitive to that surroundings, and that can be both true with ADHD and with autism. There's movement sensitivities with ADHD, so when something moves quickly, there's a heightened kind of arousal to it that's really like annoying and difficult and problematic. With autism, it's more what we call olfactory, so smells. Certain smells will really be like sensory sensitive to that person. So there's a variety of sensory sensitivities. The reason I say that is I think it's really like, instead of seeing that person as a unique creation of God, we kind of say, well, you're not acting normally there. Well, their brain is responding that way. And that's why we're trying to use sensory sensitivity therapy. We're not trying to do as much of the behavioral stuff, but more about, hey, can we be kind to ourselves, and how do we reframe some of those sensory sensitivities, and how can you do some prayer time or mindfulness time to just relax and rest? How do you do some doodling when you're in Mulliken? I'm a professor, so you have ADHD in Mulliken's class. You're doing a little doodling. You're doing a little bit of like reframing and doing things that are sensitive, that are releasing these sensory sensitivities. A lot of students in the class, maybe Mulliken's talking too loud. Make sense? So we have to be really compassionate and understanding about these sensory sensitivities. That's a new thing we've added in how we understand ADHD as well as autistic spectrum. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So those are 4 things I wanted to share for sure. Let's stop for some questions at this point, and I'll do some more talking at the end. Yeah.
All right, I've got the mic here. I'm going to bring the mic to you so the people online can hear. So right here.
You mentioned in the beginning sometimes diagnosing early has better long-term effects on the brain and stuff. Is there like a sweet spot where you would look to try and get a diagnosis to go through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the truth is I'm a parent, and I have that condition, and I've got 3 kiddos. I go, oh, I see you. Like I have a lot of anxiety myself, and I have 3 daughters. I go, oh, I see you. You got that. And instead of like, why do you have it? Oh, I see you. Right? So if we see that, doesn't mean, when they're 2, we get them diagnosed. It just means like as we're going into school settings, as we're going into different settings, we might start that process a little bit. Okay? And again, always know, like with any mental health condition, besides genetics, the other big piece is stress, right? So stress reduction matters a ton. So if I'm a parent and I have an anxiety issue, I get to know my anxiety issue versus really projecting that onto my kiddo that has more of that genetic vulnerability to it. So instead of taking my stuff out, I see you, I have compassion for you. So to your question, I do think earlier the better. I don't think there's a sweet spot, but I do think school age matters. And that's why the schools don't do it perfectly, but it's kind of nice. That's been a gift to us in general, that the schools are trying to make accommodations. Like I have maybe a couple hundred students every semester right now, and maybe 10% of accommodations, and it's been really helpful. Really helpful for those folks with ADHD. The other thing we're noticing about this, you should know this, I didn't mention this earlier, ADHD has a 50% comorbidity with substance use disorders. So that's really, really high, which means like if I have ADHD, it's untreated, I can't land the plane, I struggle socially, my financial management is a struggle, I have job struggles, I'm procrastinating, I'm late, I have all these things. Boy, that drink feels good, or that other substance feels really good, and now I don't have to deal with that. There's a high comorbidity. There's also a lot of impulsivity with addiction. There's a lot of impulsivity with ADHD. So the research is showing that when we treat ADHD early, and again, through the medicine, through the practices that we're teaching kiddos and adolescents of kindness and understanding and seeing the life they have and managing that life versus that life managing them, and just being more gentle towards themselves and like understanding why this is a little bit difficult, but here's what I get to do with some ways to be kinder to myself. As we do that, the need to use for coping is quieter. The need to use to mask the pain is quieter. So that's another reason why we would offer that early diagnosis can be helpful.
All right, another question. I'll bring the mic to you. Yep, right over here, Larry.
I grew up in a generation where we didn't have this at all. No clue whatsoever. Yet most of that generation didn't use it as a way of getting out of issues. They just had to deal with whatever was given to them. What would
Or
you
the people that were living with that
Right,
person had
right.
to deal with that.
They had to deal with their normal issues, but there was no ability to find an answer for it. What would you say to the people who are in their 50s and 60s now, who would never have the slightest clue that they have it?
Yeah.
What would you say to them? What kind of need would they need to find an answer for their issues?
No, great question. And I think it's okay. Each situation's different, right? That person gets to be kind to themselves in their 60s and go, I probably had that, but I figured out how to manage it, right? And that helps me to see why finances were hard. Let me go to my spouse and go, yeah, I think this is what's been happening. And, it's not intentional. They just didn't know. And again, there'll be a certain swath of humanity where they figured it out. And so for the mild cases, doesn't mean everybody needs to be on medicine, everybody needs to be a therapist. Remember, to have the diagnosis, it has to be impairing your functioning somewhere. Make sense? So it doesn't mean we're overdiagnosing everything, but I love the question because, as I get older, I'm going like, well, why is this such a big deal? It wasn't that big of a deal back then. And I should just be aware that what I may have thought now back then may not be what is kind of true now, if that makes sense. Like what is true in our society today, and how do we get to show compassion, show all those grace-based strategies, which includes accountability, of course, but understanding is a big deal. So each case is different, but for those of us that are in that age range and we're kind of wondering, which is really normal to do, is just kind of go, let me learn more about it. Because middle adulthood is all about the idea of generativity versus stagnation. So how am I as a middle adult trying to understand what's going on with the younger generation? What do I get to do to have understanding about it? How can I be learning more about it? And then also just share what I saw growing up and what I see now from a place of wisdom and critical thinking and a kind spirit.
question. We have a grandson that has ADHD, and my son and daughter-in-law are working very hard not to go the drug route. At what point does it make sense to do that?
You know, this is way too generalized, so I really apologize. But in general, the more severe the condition, the more helpful medicine can be, in general. We're talking about anxiety, depression, bipolar. We're talking about schizophrenia, it's really medicine first. Talking about bipolar, it's medicine first. When ADHD has like severity to it, like, again, because it's on a spectrum, I think everything will eventually be on a spectrum like autism is. So somebody has a little bit of an inattention thing, and then they rein it back in, but oh, I kind of went off there, and are a little impulsive, but they kind of rein it, you know, they've got this regulation capacity. It isn't quite as loud, the sensory stuff isn't quite as loud or jarring. The inattention when they're reading isn't quite like, I got to reread that 3 times in order to figure that out. I'm skipping lines here. So if it's really severe, the beauty of medicine is that it's a healing agent and it's trial and error. Right, here's what we know to be the FDA-approved for medicines for people this age that can help with ADHD. It doesn't always help. Once in a while, it'll make it worse. More often than not, it helps. The worst thing that happens is that it doesn't help, but hey, because we love and care, we're going to use that idea as well, versus be afraid of what could go wrong, because we're trusting the science, we're trusting the process. But yeah, I would say in general, with ADHD, medicine is always something to think about as a strategy. Doesn't mean everybody needs to be on the medicine, but it's certainly something we're taking a look at. And you know, sorry, but I just see so many cases where, oh my gosh, I started to understand math for the first time in my life. Yay! It's like, yay. Other people are like, oh, it made me kind of fuzzy, and I don't like the way it makes me feel. Okay, they wean them off, and we'll try some other kind of practices. So we get to understand the trial and error because we're all trying to figure it out because each body is so different.
Excuse me. When I was teaching school a long time ago, this would have been so helpful because it was just a kid who was trouble and played out in so many ways. But I'm wondering if you have written anything about how this has evolved. Is there a book or something that we could read as we try to engage the new way that this is looked at? Would you recommend something?
Yeah, Driven by Distraction is one of the first books that was written a long time ago. Russell Barkley is a great author on ADHD. Driven by Distraction. And then I think it's Russell Barkley. Sorry, I should know that name, but my ADHD took over there. It was like, whoop, and it went. But yeah, I would, yeah, and I think that's a wonderful idea. And I think it's really beautiful you're talking about the school thing. And that's the dilemma when you are kind of like, yeah, it's like, you know, when somebody has a virus, they have a virus, and they just need to, it's going to be a couple of weeks, it's going to, you know, and they have a virus, people understand it. So if somebody has an emotional virus, we still are kind of like, we still have issues with the stigma of mental health. We still have kind of this issue in general, I think, that says, you know, if you got a mental health issue, just kind of suck it up, buttercup, and get better, and let's go, you know, and we don't say that if somebody's got a broken kneecap, you know. So we need to understand that physical health and emotional health are the same things. There's genetic vulnerabilities, there's stress on the body, on the mind, and we just get to treat it. We get to have understanding about that. And we get to do that. We get to understand that.
So I married someone with ADHD that didn't find out he had it until our son was diagnosed in college. And suddenly I pointed the finger to him and said, hello, I'm not the one who's had all the power tool accidents. And the doctor said, oh, I'm sorry, I should have picked up on this much earlier. But they both suffer tremendously from the inability to fall asleep. It's not really insomnia, but they can't shut their poor little brains off when it's time to go to bed. Can you address that?
It's a great point. We do believe that ADHD is kind of the busy brain. You know, it's busy. It's active. And that's why sometimes we misdiagnose it with anxiety, because usually anxiety is always what-ifing, there's a lot of energy. And that's why we underdiagnose comorbid depression, because depression usually is low energy, but there's a lot of rumination going on. But we would say with ADHD, the mind is just active all the time. And that's what makes it tricky when the person you love is talking to you and you're going, yep, yep. And then whoop, it's not getting in. It's like, I love you, I'm for you, I heard you, I hear you. And then, yeah, boom, where'd it go? And then if we don't understand, but again, in that moment, I'm not doing something to my wife, I'm surviving, and she's not doing something to me when she just gets upset. I go, oh, I see, I can see why you're upset with that, here's what is true, and, we try to figure it out. So, yeah, I'm just glad everybody's okay from the power tool thing, right? Because that impulsivity, like, boom, it's like, it's just start and stop, and there's a lot of driving accidents, too, like, hey, let's go, let's do this, and let's do that, and it's not an intentional thing. It's neurodevelopmental. It's a natural biological condition, and that's why they battle those issues. So I appreciate that. Oh, yeah, sorry. I think with the sleep thing, I don't think there's anything magical about that. I'm sorry, but I do think if sleep is really, 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 because we would say sleep is the top 5. We had a huge research project called the Wild 5, Wellness Interventions for Life's Demands. You can look it up. And they talked about 5 things to help us all be well, and there's nothing new under the sun, really, but the top one was sleep optimization. And so with people with ADHD, they have all kinds of sleep difficulties. They stay up till 2 because the brain's going in and out of their cycles of sleep. So when I have somebody with ADHD and the sleep is debilitating, I don't right away go to this. I try to do some cognitive restructuring, try to help them slow down, help them do what's soothing, help them kind of run to their gratitude stuff so their brain's a little calmer. But sometimes a sleep aid can be really helpful. Sometimes the sleep aid can help the circadian rhythms get back to that, when you're my age, like, what is it, like 10 to 4:30 or something, the normal sleep pattern or something, but it's, it helps the sleep pattern come in. It helps them get through a cycle of sleep, which is an hour and a half through all 4 stages, and it helps them optimize sleep, and that also helps the irritability factor. So I'm for sure, working with my primary or a psychiatrist to talk about really the latest sleep aids that are helpful for ADHD. Thanks for bringing up the sleep thing. Really appreciate it.
The question I had, you actually already answered, but I just thought I'd offer the observation. I was an elementary school teacher for 35 years and had a lot of students in my classroom that had that diagnosis, but almost 100% of them were boys. And I think that can be a concern for young ladies, though, because I don't know whether it's the stereotype that we have of boys versus girls, but boys tend to be a little bit more active during those early years, and girls can kind of slip through the cracks.
Well said.
And it was actually confirmed in my own family. My oldest daughter, who was a very intelligent young lady, and she did very well in school, but she recognized she got to college, and all of a sudden things became more complex.
Yes.
She recognized that she needed to be treated and seen, and so, yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Oh, I really
think
appreciate the story.
It's very difficult for identifying that with young ladies.
Yeah, it's a
girls.
newer thing, and I also want to just push into this. You probably didn't think you'd be hearing this today, but there's even recent research coming out of the University of Kentucky about really understanding the menstrual cycle and the different parts of the cycle that are most vulnerable to ADHD, like loudness or other mental health conditions. So look for that research coming out about, and of course we know about PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I've worked with plenty of women who have that crushing disorder that, during that week before menses and stuff, it's really like problematic. And so we're learning more and more about vulnerabilities to levels of dysregulation during certain parts of the cycle. And as we understand that and treat that, that not only helps the female who's suffering, but also helps the family members to walk alongside and be compassionate and understanding versus, well, here we go again, right? It's not here we go again if somebody has a stomach flu and they're throwing up. It's like, oh, I got the stomach flu. Well, here we go again with dysregulation. Well, let's treat that and let's create space for that. So we're learning more and more about the female vulnerability to ADHD, to your great point, and also learning more about, in general, kind of with mental health vulnerabilities, sometimes cycle-related.
Right here. Todd, you're doing a great job. Thank you. Thanks very much. Mine is kind of two-part. I have a comment and a question. I have a granddaughter who has ADHD, and like what some of you have talked about earlier, being 100 years ago a special ed teacher, I felt that she had ADHD long before they actually had the diagnosis. And the parents struggled with putting the child on medication for a very, very long time. And I have seen a world of difference in this little girl now that she is on some medication. And the parents really were very resistant, and I understand that. But the difference is amazing. In my own background as a school teacher, I would have a student come in after lunch and just be absolutely on the table, dancing, ridiculous behavior. And I would just quietly go up to him and say, have you been to the nurse's office today to get your meds? And he's, oh, I forgot. We'll go down and get your medication and come back in 20 minutes.
Thank you for your service.
And yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and anyway, the child was completely different. So that's my ADHD story.
I appreciate that story.
Also, I think a lot of little girls don't get the attention or the diagnosis because they don't have the hyperactivity
Correct.
part of it.
Yep.
It's just that they have the
The
attention
inattentive
deficit
stuff.
part
Yep,
of it.
that's fair.
So then going to the autistic grandchild who is 8 years old and is really receiving a lot of services, which is wonderful. The parents have done a lot of intervention with him. I am just curious, are there any support groups around that you know of? Because it would be really nice if there were.
Anybody know of any for autistic spectrum? I would, if it were me, I would for sure go to the clinic that's providing, like the clinics that are doing a lot of the work for ASD, they'll usually have a resource. I don't work with ASD a ton. I usually refer out to, for other providers that have it. So I would be talking to that provider and see if there's a support group. It's a great, really needed. And that's so awesome that both are getting the care they need. Autistic Speak? Thank you.
Yep, they do. It is on the web, and Autism Speaks, for those who are online and maybe didn't hear that, is a local support group for that.
Thank you for your thoughts.
With a strong case of ADHD, and she has dyslexia also, do those two go hand in hand?
Yeah, great questions. There's a lot of comorbidity with other learning disorders or other communication disorders, and that's kind of what you see. And sometimes what we've done is had them just with the learning disorder and miss the ADHD, or have the ADHD and miss the learning disorder. So dyslexia can be a common comorbid. And when I say comorbidity means that more than one condition, so they have a comorbid vulnerability to another condition. So yes, it's very common to have especially the inattentive type, and also have the learning disorder like dyslexia, for sure.
Okay, I have a question about someone like one of our sons had some issues during elementary school with attention and busyness, etc. Back then, he's now 40. Back then, he had a little bit of ADHD, a little bit of OCD, and a little bit of Tourette's syndrome.
Yeah.
A triangular kind of thing.
Sure.
And then we never put him on medicine, and he just kind of managed through high school. And we thought it looked like it was subsiding, getting a little bit better. Come to find out, he recently, on his own, went through the diagnosis or the testing. And it does have adult ADHD, and started on Adderall. You know, he's got a busy career job, and he said, I cannot believe the difference it makes in my everyday work life.
Yes.
And why wasn't I put on this a long time ago?
Yeah, I appreciate the story.
You know,
Yeah.
I know people have hesitations about medicine.
Yes.
But so my question to you is, somebody who is at that age range, what is the process to be officially diagnosed? Can they just go to their primary care person? Or do they have to, I don't know what the extent of
Well,
the testing is.
And we should know this dilemma. As you know, you probably, I don't know if you need me to tell you this, but stimulant availability is a dilemma. And so, and psychiatry availability is a dilemma. When I was out in Boston, it was a national conference, actually international, and they were talking about there's a shortage of us, and a lot of them were psychiatrists that were giving the presentations. And so what's happening now is PCPs, primary care providers, are ending up kind of doing more, they're shouldering more just for availability purposes. So it really depends on the PCP. Like if the truth is he or she has that competency and has worked and are comfortable, working with a stimulant or other kinds of medications for ADHD, then they will be comfortable prescribing that. If not, they will usually have a name of a provider to do that. I'm really interested that you brought up the ADHD OCD thing because, OCD used to be in the anxiety disorders. Now we moved it to its own area. And with OCD, you have obsessive thoughts that lead to compulsive behaviors. But what you have that's similar to the ADHD and the autistic spectrum is kind of the rigid reactions under stress, right? Prefrontal cortex down, boom, a rigid reaction, and they're compulsive about it. So it can feel tricky, like I certainly have had treatment plans that have ADHD as a primary, but rule out, meaning pay attention for the OCD. But I think what you're talking about too is you can have a situation where the kiddo is like finding some legs in different activities from 10 to 18, and the house is pretty healthy, so there's a lot of toxicity of kind of raising stressors and inflaming those genetic markers, right? Because stress is the match, right? Stress is the match that inflames the genetic vulnerabilities. So it could have been too is that the person was in the battle but managing it because they had rhythms and routines and practices, which is a big treatment for ADHD, by the way, is rhythms and routines and rest. 3 R's, rhythms, routines, and rest. I mean, we're rigid about it, but we're creating rhythms and routines so we land the plane. So I just want to validate what you said, Marcy, about that journey. Yeah, and how it can be missed.
Other questions? Yes, right here. Good. Made that easy on me.
There's so much about genetics and neurodevelopmental knowledge that we didn't have in the past, and it seems to be coinciding with a real distrust in science and medicine and the institutions that are creating this amazing knowledge base. What are the strategies around kind of the reaction against the amazing knowledge that we're developing around some of these issues?
That's really a great question. The best advice I can give is get to know a couple of people that are doing that work, and you'll know they put their shoes on the same way you and I do, and 9 times out of 10, they're doing the best they can at their field. And I know I've gone to a conference 35 years in a row that has a lot of those folks in it, and they're really working hard at trying to do a good job. So, yeah, I think when we choose to trust doesn't mean we're dumb, stupid, and naive. It means we're choosing to trust the immunologist versus, some therapist in Edina, who doesn't know what he's talking about, about that area, right? So we go to the people who are trained to try to understand that and try to at least, but we look for people we can trust, and we get to try to trust that. We do. It's not a blind trust. Sure. Yep. And, and I think what happens, too, is there's plenty of stories where medication didn't help. There's plenty of stories of misdiagnoses, and I've certainly have had that happen to me in my practice where, I missed that. Didn't mean to, but here's what I thought, and so but people are really, their supervisor trying to do the best they can is what most people are in the field are trying to do.
So I'm intrigued to hear maybe a little about the idea behind the success of those with ADHD, their ability to kind of rise above and get outside of the existing structures of the system, which, when I hear back to the days of elementary school, that kind of stuff, I was the kid that was put in the corner and told to sit up, sit down, shut up, and they'd put headphones on me and that kind of stuff. Not saying that you were, no, definitely.
Did you
But
have
I
a
mean-
teacher? Yeah.
But I'm
yeah.
intrigued to hear
Oh, I love
how
that
the
question.
structures need to change to accommodate these individuals, because these individuals who come through typically have more success rates.
And I would say in therapy, there's a lot more of that going on than there ever used to be. Like this ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, is much more about, like I'm always going, whoa, let's go, you got an ADHD man, let's go, here's your strengths, what are your passions? Like with autistic spectrum, they have restrictive and repetitive behaviors, but what their restrictive interests are, there'll be a savant in. I have some of that myself. I can remember my high school friends, my childhood friend's phone number. Like I haven't talked to him in 35 years. Like, well, who? I mean, but like there's a beauty in that brain development, right? So, and the medicines in these kind of cases aren't like stunting all of that. We're not talking about a mood stabilizer that stunts all of it. So yeah, I think it is like, we're treating, but the therapeutic structures are less about, hey, don't do this, don't do that. Like, hey, here's what you get to do with that mind, right? Here's your strengths, here's your gifts, here's your talents. How do we use that? Because with ADHD for sure, I work a lot with like, what are you for? And what are the gifts you have and the talents you have? Because that also what does it do? It reduces stress, right? So thanks for that question. Yeah, I would say therapeutically, we're doing a lot more of how to have that person run towards light and run towards the things that they're for versus, hey, make sure you don't do this, make sure you don't do that. You're bad at this, you're bad at that. It's a great question.
Todd, is there any new research on how our diet can impact ADHD?
Yeah. Ketogenic, for sure. Everybody heard of that? So there's always dietary stuff in the water. I refer a lot of folks to a dietitian if I see them, not to put them on a diet, but just to have that track. One of the 5 things of wellness intervention for life's demands is diet, right? So if I have vulnerabilities to a certain condition, and dietary means can make a difference. Like lately with schizophrenia, we're finding that people that are on a ketogenic diet, along with their meds, are starting to do better. We're learning that about autistic spectrum, people that go on a ketogenic diet. And again, last 50 years, we've had different quote-unquote fads. And so I don't think this is a fad, but I think what you're always doing is you're going like, all these things matter, right? The sleep optimization matters, the dietary stuff matters, the mindfulness or the prayer matters, the regulating, slowing the game down matters. So everything isn't so fast and we're reactionary, we're mindful, we're present, I always talk about that stop skill when we're under stress. The stop stands for stop is the S, take a breath is the T, observe what I'm thinking and feeling, and faith-based, bringing in God's Spirit to kind of, what's going on here? What's the truth again? And then the P is I'm going to proceed mindfully. So if I've got a condition that makes me a little bit vulnerable to fire-ready aim, whether it's just my ethnicity or my mental health stuff, whatever it is, I get to be practicing those things to create that kind of mindfulness to help us. So all those things matter. Diet matters, mindfulness matters, sleep matters, social connectivity matters a lot. Loneliness, as we know, is an epidemic. And again, knowing how you and I connect best socially will be another stress reducer. Okay? I'm an extrovert, so the more I connect with 60 unfamiliar faces afterwards, yay, I'm energized. I find interruption stimulating. My spouse is an introvert. She loves familiar spaces, loves quiet, loves to read. We figured that out kind of after, it took us about 25 years in our marriage to figure that out. But yeah, so we're both firstborns too, so we have some really good ideas how the other person can become a better Christian and kind of live a better life. But yeah, so social connectivity matters too, right? We get to connect, whatever that means for you and your story. So that's another piece of help for you.
Thank you so much, Todd, for all that the wisdom you've imparted. I am particularly interested in the comorbidities, and so I do have a daughter who's diagnosed with ADHD, but has also been diagnosed with some other kind of scary mental health things. And listening to the comorbidity talk, what would be your suggestion for how do people ferret out what's what? And some of the diagnoses she has received have come from different providers, so it's not like a one-stop shop.
Yeah, that's a great question, and each case is different. I would just offer, like, in general, what we would say with the most severe disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, if either of those are conditions that are true, then we would say, but they also meet the criteria for a couple of other things, like ADHD or depression or with bipolar. You know, a lot of times with bipolar, we've missed it where we thought the person just had depression, whereas they have really crippling depression of bipolar 2, for example. So we kind of want to know what's the root. I always say, what's the loudest symptoms, and let's treat those. And that usually guides you to the most accurate diagnosis. Does that make sense? So what's the loudest symptoms causing the loudest impairment? But you bring up a really good point. But you know, with ADHD and autistic spectrum, those are kind of neurodevelopmental, so those have like strong like genetic roots like bipolar does and like schizophrenia does, like high heritability. So usually you don't see a lot of comorbidity there. I'm meaning like you can have secondary anxiety, depression, all the things with ADHD, for example. And so, when I see that ADHD diagnosis, I'm treating that first because that can help quiet the worry, quiet the sadness. It's not a quick fix, but it's helping, like you all said, with appropriate medicine, like all of a sudden, I wish I would have known. You know, the body's just, right, stress gets reduced, and that really quiets genetic vulnerabilities a lot.
Todd, good to see you here.
Oh,
Thanks
and
for coming.
welcome, sir. How are you? I didn't see you sneak in there.
Todd and I went to high school together, went to elementary.
Yeah, please don't bring up stuff if you don't like it.
I won't. I'll keep it clean. Todd is a good guy. Todd, a question for you is, I know a young man who's at Wheaton College, and he's been on meds for about 10 years. And just in the past year, he decided to get off them intentionally because he feels as if he's kind of lost part of himself, that it's sort of put a buffer between himself and reality. And he took a class in spiritual formation at Wheaton, and the professor had one book that they put in front of the students, which was not by a Christian, you said this, but it's got a lot of value. It's called Stolen Focus. And it basically makes similar cases like this. So can you speak into that? Have you heard of people who have taken ADHD meds, had success with it,
sure,
but then found that they feel like it's kind of put a counterfeit into them? They're not their
Yeah, that wouldn't be the norm. That would be the exception, but it's for sure there, right? For sure it's there. And usually you'll see that in more mild cases. Like another way to think about it is like with anxiety, right? So I have some anxiety, but I can hop on a plane. People that have anxiety, they can do spiritual formation, but if they're hopping on a plane and they can't fly because they have a phobia, then they'll need something to just tweak that a little bit, right? And that's where medicine can be amazing, right? So I'm going to pray it up and I'm going to do all those amazing things as a Christ follower, but also I'm going to need something for my broken leg. But to your point, yes, there will be cases also where people will outlive the medicine sometimes. That makes sense? So maybe in your friend's case, it was really helpful early, and then he kind of grew out of it, if you will. Other people, it's a lifeline forever. And so what's really important is that we know that each case is different, and we're really critically thinking about each case uniquely versus running to answers that are a wide swath for everything, right? So yes, to answer your question, I've certainly seen cases like that. So thanks for bringing that up. Good to see you.
All right, Todd, thank you. Let's give Todd a hand. It is 1 o'clock, and I want to respect that many of you are here on lunch break. But the questions and the level of questions really, I think, indicate the fact that this is a high-need area. So we will, in the future, have another talk on ADHD, and we'll talk about autism again in the future because it is such a high need. I'm somebody who I'm convinced as well has ADD and has had it since I was a kid, and I'm one of those undiagnosed. And there's a book I read this year. It's a New York Times bestseller this year by Penn and Kim Holderness called ADHD is Awesome. Very different way of looking at it. But Penn is the husband in that couple, hyper creative, hyperactive, former anchor on a local news station, and they started making some fun videos as a couple, and they've gone viral, and they're kind of the couple that more people watch their fun little videos every day. And that creativity that the ADHD allows him to do that. But what I love about the book is not what he writes. I mean, there's a lot of practical stuff for those who have ADHD, but what she writes. Because sometimes to be the spouse of the person with ADHD or to have to work with the person with ADHD, there are challenges that come with that too. And so if you have ADHD and you're like me, I can't read a book without listening to a book 3 times the speed as I'm driving down on the highway. That's how I read books, because I don't have the patience to just sit and watch it. So it's got to be audio and it's got to be fast, right, when you're in that world. But it is a great book for those of you who have it and want to know how to be a blessing to your spouse or to those who work for you and have to live with it. Our office has to have dance parties too, at least once a day. And I apologize to my office all the time, but that's what it's like working with somebody with ADD. So it is a fun place to work, all right? ADHD is awesome, and it was the #1 New York Times best-selling book this year for a number of weeks. So really, really great book. Our future schedule is here again. Great series of talks that are coming up, and hope that you will join us in January. I'm going to miss you here for a couple of weeks here, but on your tables are some invitations to Christmas Eve. So I do hope that you come to one of our Christmas Eve services too. December 23rd or 24th here at Wooddale. It's going to be a great week. Todd, thank you for the gift that you are and continue to be. And Todd will be back twice, by the way, in the spring as well to share with us. Have a great day, everyone. Great to see you.